Chapter 4. Saturday, the 8th of October, 2016, 4:07 a.m., Riverport University, Quantum Physics Building. Jack had left behind the relative safety and calm of Thailand for this. Not only was he involved in the commission of at least one felony, his best friend was acting weird, and Jack was already being dragged back into Will's mess of a life. What's more, he hadn't even seen Will yet. Something hard kicked beneath the floor. As Jack backed away from the machine, the hair on his arms tickled. Thick cords of cabling spasmed like living things. Paul? Here's the deal, Paul's tinny double voice piped over the intercom. We hired Will as a consultant on this project. It's supposed to do that, relax. So we hired Will, and things were going pretty great. He seemed stable. Not too much of a muttering to himself stuff. Kept a reasonable focus and ironed out kinks like nobody else on the team. But he became erratic. Define erratic. Erratic like that time at Walmart, or the erratic like the things with the council planners. More like that time he found us playing with his stuff in the barn. Jack closed his eyes and swore. That had been a bad one. It had been pre-medication, and Will had really gone off the deep end. A day-long fit of rage, followed by an inability to process it. Will had disappeared into the barn for 48 hours, muttering and shouting. When Jack tried to make peace, Will had thrown a plate at him, mashed potatoes flying everywhere. It was the only time Jack hadn't felt safe around his older brother. You could have told me that in the email, Paul. If there was one thing he'd learned from the episode with the two women in Belize, it was that nothing is more important in this life than happiness. Whatever it looks like, wherever you find it. This was no way to live. Paul leaned against the console. What did we always say? Come on. What did we always say? We stick together, or the bastards win. Right. Tonight is the most important moment of my life. I wouldn't be here without you, so I couldn't have done this without you. He turned and popped the clear Perspex idiot shield from an oversized black punch button. I want you to be able to say that you were in the room when the world changed. Paul's palm came down gently, and the room outside blasted to electric life. Mechanisms activated beneath the curved walkway that circled the core, and from beneath the walkway, flat double-hinged sections swung up, opened and clicked into place. In a single wave, corridor sections unfurled around the circumference. In seconds, the walkway had become a sealed corridor circling the crackling geometric sphere at the chamber's heart. Jack stepped back. Paul said, "Put these on," tossing him a pair of photoreactive goggles. "Shouldn't you just give me those before you hit that button?" A monitor suspended from the roof flashed a green alert. "The ground security door's been opened. We've got about 3 minutes." Paul ran up the steel mesh chairs to the entry door, slashed his card through the reader, and locked it down tight. "Call it 5. Follow me." The machine was vibrating. The core threw off sparks. The air smelled like burned hair. A shimmering corona, like a heat mirage, rose from the corridor ring. Will bulk emailed the entire project mailing list, investors included. Paul shouted above the din, coming to a stop before the gangway. He expressed his lack of confidence in the project in a very detailed manner. In short, he freaked the investors right out. Funding was pulled, Jack. They shut the entire project down. Jack nodded, understanding. Checked the door, glared at Paul. They fired you. They fired you, and you're here with a hacked code key and about to fire up a reactor that you only real expert thinks is massively dangerous? With me? Come on, we've done worse. I don't think we have, Paul. Something under the floor belted against itself, and the sphere at the center of the room started thrumming. This is 6 years of work, Jack. People trusted me to guide them to the finish line. People with families. Once administration sees that it works safely, you'll go to jail. It'll be worth it. Jack took that in. This is just like that time with that girl from summer camp. I don't deny that Heather had a few problems. You're white knighting, man. Again. Let's get the fuck out of here. This is about families, Jack, and futures. The future. Lives will change if I can make that happen. Jack pointed straight at the machine. This is based on Will's work, isn't it? Jack insisted. He knows what he's talking about. I mean, before we went off the rails, before our parents were gone, he was doing good work, right? He might be nuts, but he's not an idiot. The team's been over it, and there's nothing, and I mean nothing, to Will's accusations. Maybe so, but I didn't come back to get arrested. Shut it down, okay? It sounds really pissed off. Paul shook his head. Too late. Once the core's been activated, there's no way to turn it off, short of finding some way to collapse the black hole. The machine stabilized, soothed. The vibration dropped to a low, comforting hum. Black hole? Paul held up his damp fistful of post-it notes. I told the team, we've got a good dev. We know it works. Show me how to start it and I'll take the fall. I'm sure that once the committee... Black hole? A sharp quad-toned snap fired off as 4 safety clasps detached from the airlock. The sound, finding a dozen flat surfaces to reverberate from. The airlock seal on a circular corridor cracked, and heavy hydraulics hauled the blast door aside, venting atmosphere. The distortion around the core at the center of the machine dimmed. I should have never turned you on to the Smiths. Through the airlock door came a shape. A person. Someone had been in the corridor the entire time. The figure braced itself against the wide lip of the airlock seal before taking one trembling step onto the ramp and onto the lab. It gasped, chest heaving, and exited the machine entirely. Hey, me, the figure said to Jack. It's you. Then shook his head. Damn. Jack took off his goggles. There's no mistake. Jack was looking at himself. Holy shitballs, Paul said. Jack's clone, all smiles, held his palms up good-naturedly. Hey, it's cool. This all works out, and Paul? His expression darkened. You still owe me a fucking explanation. Paul shook his head to clear it. Checked his watch, now a man back on mission. To Jack, get in the machine. He was at the L console next to the gangway, making adjustments. Jack didn't hear him. Hey, Jack's clone said to Jack. Want to see a trick? Watch this. He directed Jack's attention to Paul. Paul, Jack said, deeply unsettled, yet unable to take his eyes off the doppelganger on the ramp. And go, said Jack's clone. What is it? Paul and Jack's clone said together. Wait, Paul and Jack's clone said simultaneously. We don't have time for this, Paul and Jack's clone shouted. Knock it off, they chorused. Paul stepped forward, stabbing at his watch. Security is on there, they yelled at each other. Ah, screw you! Jack's clone spread his arms in a theatrical ta-da, utterly pleased with himself. Huh. Yeah. How about that? We got 2 minutes, Paul snapped. Jack rounded on his clone, snapping his fingers. Hey, whoever you are, inside pocket. He snapped his fingers again, opened his palms. Way ahead of you, his clone said, and handed over a keyring. Jack stared at the keyring, familiar as his jacket, his bathroom mirror, his own bed. There they all were. The rusted old key to his cabin in Chiang Mai, the 64-gig flash drive he used to back up his articles, his iPhone tool, the bottle opener he picked up from an aeronautics plant outside of Oxford, Mississippi, all attached to a branded keyring that came with the last pair of shoes he bought new. By contrast, the silver .38 slug was overdressed, thin leather strap threaded through the 48-gauge hole at the base. Jack looked at Paul, wanting confirmation. This guy's me? Paul produced his own set of keys. Mercedes keyring. 2 keys. 1 silver bullet. This is a time machine, Jack said. Jack's clone took back his keys. I'll be needing those. Into the airlock, Jack. That's how this happens. Jack's clone head was on a swivel, taking them both in. Intense. Hey, Paul, what would have happened if I didn't do what I did? You know, screw with you. The parroting thing? To answer your question, Paul said to the clone, it's not possible. You would always have said and done what you've done, just said and done. Your hair is a direct result of what has gone before. Now get off the ramp. You're staying. Jack, you're going. Going? Going where? The real Jack this time. I'm sending you 2 minutes into the past so that we can have this conversation. The machine waited, thrumming heavily. And what if this plays out like the end of Evil Dead 2? You're not going to the fucking Middle Ages. You need this machine to step out of, and that wasn't functioning until we turned it on 4 minutes ago. That's as far back as this machine will take you, to the moment it was first activated. Now move. I've been waiting 3 years to try this thing. Jack walked cautiously up the gangway, eyeing the distortion waves emanating from the machine's housing. If I get lymphoma, I swear to God, it's not radioactive, it's chronon active, completely revolutionary and entirely clean, as far as we can tell. Swell. Jack stepped over the lip, into the airlock, looked around inside. No controls, no handles. Hey, if something goes wrong, how do I reopen this thing? You don't, Paul said. Once the charge builds up within the promenade, it needs to be expanded before the internal atmosphere is vented. Failure to do so could cause big problems. Hydraulics engaged, hefting the door away from the housing and sliding toward the seal. Just walk counterclockwise around the core. 1 full rotation will complete the journey. Fine, but when I get out of here, I want the door pressed into place, then locked off with a rubbery smooching sound. A blast of cool air filled the room. Jack's ears popped, wiggling a finger in one ear, opening and closing his jaw. He peered through the viewplate. Outside, Paul was waving him to the left. The other Jack smiled and waved beside Paul. The airlock had 2 identical doors. On cue, the left door disengaged. Jack stepped into the promenade, the airlock sealing behind him. The interior of the circular corridor was made of some kind of non-conductive white ceramic, featureless, blood warm beneath his fingers, and floored with waffle-treated black rubber. The thrum of the core sounded louder inside the corridor, the womb of some furious monster. The thrum transmuted to a sudden whine. The floor kicked. Jack said, "Fuck." And silence. The regular adrenal pound of the core was gone. Though it couldn't have been more than 20 feet from where he stood, the airlock was so perfectly soundless. Jack could have believed it was floating in space. Blood pulsed in his eardrums, his breath rasping like it was piped through earphones. Jack, he took a step forward, peering around the internal corridor. Hello? No response. He started walking. No other sound was forthcoming. The trip around the core felt a lot like walking on a treadmill, like the corridor was moving around him rather than he was moving through it. Then the exit door appeared. Jack hit the red release button. The seal cracked. The hatch slid aside, and he stepped into the airlock from which he had departed a minute ago. Peering through the viewplate, he saw the gangway, the time lab, Paul and his double, his past self. The airlock hissed open. Jack steadied himself against the lip of the seal, suddenly lightheaded. Internal atmosphere vented, and he stepped outside, giddy. He knew this scene. He knew what the Jack before him was feeling. He hadn't noticed how utterly dumbstruck Paul had looked the first time around. "Hey, me," Jack said to his clone. "It's you." Then shook his head. Too weird. Like vertigo in his own skull. Like waking up from a dream inside a dream to realize he was still dreaming. Damn. The clone at the bottom of the ramp took off his goggles, peering at Jack with an expression that resembled hostility. Jack put his hands up. "Hey, it's cool. This all works out, and Paul, you still owe me a fucking explanation." Saturday, 8th of October, 2016, 4:17 a.m. Riverport, Massachusetts, Quantum Physics Building. Jack's past self re-entered the machine and peered anxiously from the airlock as the hatch closed. He and Paul waved him off. There was a powerful snap. The distortion effect around the corridor pulsed outward, vanished, and the machine returned to its usual low hum. "Jack," Paul smiled alarmingly, "with this device, this machine that you're looking at right now, can be put an end to suffering, disease, catastrophe. We can go back in time before. Imagine if this machine had existed on September 10th, 2001. Imagine how different our world would be today if we can go back with enough time to stop those flights. Imagine being able to develop a cure for a terrible disease in the future, and then bring it to the past. Just think." Jack looked at the machine. If in the future you know what this works, like you said, wouldn't you come back to this moment right now and tell yourself that? Paul's mouth opened uncertainly. He glanced at the machine. I don't know, He laughed it off and made a final adjustment. Okay, my turn. Destination's date been set for 2 minutes from now. All you have to do once I'm inside is hit the go button. Got it? Paul, security's about to walk in here and find me alone with $11 billion worth of bleeding edge, whatever the fuck. They will not buy that I was just looking for the cafeteria. Just 2 minutes, Jack. The door's locked. You'll be fine. Paul moved up the gangway, pivoted, thrust both arms into the air, and hooted. Woo! Jack responded and opened the airlock, realizing 4 cameras were filming him in commission of federal offense. Paul stepped inside. Okay, lock me in. Jack tapped the key. The airlock sucked itself shut. A green alert flashed. The elevator had just opened on the other side of the lab's security door. Paul, make this quick. We don't have... The security door beeped and hissed open. Long. Paul's face fell. Oh no. A forlorn figure stood at the top of the stairs, thin and haunted inside a beaten old coat, looking at Jack and Paul like a child betrayed. What? Said William Joyce. What have you done? Will clattered down the stairs. What have you done? He hadn't run a comb through his hair in days. Shirt and pants were a calendar use. What's happening, Will? His brother rounded on Jack, his thin-figured grip pinching into Jack's shoulders, gaze flicking over factors and dependencies only he could see. You have to help me. We have to shut this down. We have to shut this down, Jack. He abandoned Jack, faced the machine. The core is live, but as we disconnect the promenade, it's useless for transport. Paul's voice crackled over the quad system. Jack, stop him. If he damages the network, anything can happen. Shears, Will screamed. Cut the power to the promenade at the trunk. Jack grabbed his brother before he could run off. Will wrenched himself free. As he did, something heavy fell from his pocket and thudded on the deck. A 9mm automatic. Will tutted exasperatedly to pick it up. The calculations are wrong, Jack. What is that? Will disregarded the gun, annoyed, but didn't pocket it. Jack, you're not listening. The Myers-Joyce field is being rendered unstable. It will fracture entirely if... Will was never any good with his hands. This kid had badly a number of different ways. Will, I need you to just look at me. Can I please have the gun? A wild sweep of his arm distanced Will from his brother. Don't patronize me, Jack. You're not thinking straight. This device has been sabotaged. It will... Listen! Time is going to end. If you don't work with me, then you must get out of my way. Jack refused to engage with the madness. An old tactic. Or what, Will? Jack moved carefully toward his brother. You'll shoot me? Will raised the gun and fired into the ceiling. A needle in the ear that killed all sound, and then the shot was reverberating from a dozen surfaces. Will shoved his brother aside, knocking Jack to the rubberized floor. Through his hands and chest, pressed against the rubber, Jack felt the floor suddenly thump from somewhere deep in his guts. No! No, 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 no! Will hammered the controls, and machine's innards shifting from the low signature hum to something different, more alarming. It wasn't the charge building up. This was something else. Something more uneven, distressed, broken, escalating. Jack scrambled to his feet. Paul's face was framed by the airlock's small viewplate as smoke filled the internal cavity. Jack, you have to stop him! Jack! The promenade vibrations doubled their RPM, the distortion shimmer shifting out of sync with itself, becoming something more serrated and angry. Paul looked terrified through the clouding glass. Jack was at the hatch, failing to find any kind of manual override. We can't, Paul said, coughing. The smoke, too thick, was little more than a shadow. Even if you could open this thing, the environment in here is chronon charged. It needs to be discharged in a controlled fashion, which means I can take a stroll down the promenade. It's cool, but you'll have to hit that go button. Paul's hand stabbed the glass, pointing at the control bank where Will stood. The machine shrieked. A ceramic panel popped free, splanging to the mesh maintenance floor. Will, hit the button! Will was too preoccupied to listen. Bringing the core online. Wrong thing. Charging the promenade. Wrong thing. Using... Will's eyes ran over the screens, panicking. You used it? You've used the promenade? Oh God, oh God. Will! No response. Paul, hang tight, Air pressure shifted. Jack felt himself being pressed bodily into the muscle of a giant heart for one monstrous, elongated beat, and boom! Jack was lifted off his feet, hit the deck. 27 tons of metal, tortured by torsion, screamed like a living thing. Jack scrambled off the gangway and sprinted for controls. Maintenance grills tumbling 50 feet from the ceiling, bouncing off walkways, crackling glass. Without slowing, Jack shouldered Will to the floor, grabbed the corner of the panel, and slammed the go button. The distortion field amplified, leaped outward, broke the air. Every socket in every panel and recess vomited sparks and flamed up. White enamel tiles were painted in upward tongues of char. The machine's whine dropped. Jack gasped with relief. Then it began cycling up again, harder and faster, faster and faster. He couldn't see Paul anymore. The interior of the airlock had filled completely with black haze. Abandoning the controls, Jack cleared the distance to hatch in the seconds, slammed into it, pounded against the glass, and screamed, Paul! Go! Go! He had no idea if his friend was even conscious inside that armored sarcophagus. Will shouted Jack's name, was back on his feet, bracing himself against the control panel. We're too late! Get away from the machine! Get... The core threw off 3-foot sparks in colors Jack had never seen before. The promenade buckled inward. Jack's atoms yanked toward the core for a second, and then the opposite, times 10. The blast wave punched through Jack, flowing through his cells like water around stones, and into the room. Lights erupted. Glass exploded. Panels fried. Monitors crazed, and everything stopped. Silence, like he had known inside the promenade. Perfect, utter silence. Lowering his hand from his face, Jack opened his eyes and looked around. Everything was silent, because nothing moved. Nothing. Not the shattering glass, not the flying sparks, not the billowing and rising black smoke. Nothing. Not even his brother. Every last thing had paused, mid-action, frozen, perfectly paused, immobile, people, objects, smoke, and sparks locked in time and space. A snapshot of a moment. He reached out, touched a floating shard of glass, felt it resist, watched it budge but remain suspended in space. Jack was moving, but not a single other thing was. Will was still behind the control console, hands thrown up to shield him from the console that erupted in sparks and flame. His face contorted like a badly timed snapshot. Jack reached out, fingers stretching toward his brother's frozen expression. Will? An alert, bright green, caught his attention from one intact monitor. It read, in no uncertain terms, destination date, error. If the destination date was an error, then when had Paul gone? God pressed play. Metal crashed into metal as the control panel blew up. Will shrieked and toppled backwards as glass shotgun from the observation deck's frame. Smoke rolled out from the machine in a terrible wave as emergency lights kicked in blood red, and instantly, the room filled with 9 soldiers in hard-chested tactical gear. They didn't have helmets. They had masks for faces, and those faces leered yellow, circular, smiling. Green lasers sliced the smog, attached to black rifles that swept the room like terrible eye stalks. Behind each of a black-eyed idiot grin. The white lettering on the black chest read, Peace. Oh, good, Jack thought. None of this is real. Will was on his feet. Jack, someone is still in the machine! Targets. Targets? Every green beam flew home to one of 2 focus points. Jack or Will. A lethal wall of cartoon smiles. Jack and Will should have died. They didn't. One of the men lowered his weapon, barrel-chested, roided, confident. Ex-Marine bikers, African heterodox Christian militiamen, Israeli mujahideen, Jack had seen enough veteran mercs over the last few years to recognize one on sight. Had to be the leader.
Gentlemen!
He pointed at Will, voice muffled behind the yellow mask.
You I know.
Then at Jack.
You I don't.
He grabbed at his mask and snapped it off over his head. The yellow disc attached to the front of something like a tactical hockey mask. Ugh, this is fucking stupid. I can't breathe. He was in his 40s. Close-cropped dark hair, laughing eyes.
Boss!
One of them shifted uncomfortably.
Orders are, masks on!
Voss, dictate to me again, I'll put on clown makeup and fuck your kids. Donnie, cuff the egghead. The rest of you, delete the rando. Blank-eyed smiles swung beams from Will to Jack's chest. The floor kicked. The core flared. Blast wave. Everything paused. Everything and everyone freeze-framed in an instant. This crew had flooded through the door, down both sets of mesh stairs. Every assault gun pointed at Jack and Will. Beams frozen. Expressions frozen. The promenade had shed almost all of its plating, half skeletonized by everything it had endured, its torment tearing it apart from within. Will was resigned, eyes on the console, heedless of the 2 targeting lasers still floating over his shoulder blades. Jack reached out, took Will by the arm. The folds of Will's shirt were hard as rock, locked in a sub-moment. His brother did not move. "Will!" Jack said. "We have to go!" Nothing. His grip tightened. "Will!" Something palpable transferred from Jack, through his hand to his brother. Will's profile flared, suddenly shrouded in that familiar distortion field, and Will kicked off talking. "If he uses the machine, it..." Will stopped, realizing things had changed. "Jack! I was too late. Will! We need... We're existing within a topological defect in the Myers-Joyce field. Time, causality, all have ceased to function." Shockingly, Jack realized his brother was about to cry. "The MJ field has been fractured, Jack. Wounded. Zero state. Complete. All-encompassing stasis. Will, I was warned." Will was gone again. "I knew it. We knew it. I warned Paul, but he wouldn't listen. He wouldn't listen. This could have been avoided, but now... This happened once before. I don't think it's permanent. When this ends, those men in funny masks are gonna come to kill me and kidnap you." Then, why do they want to kidnap you? Will didn't hear. "Not the end," he said, nodding. "Just a stutter." Nodding more vociferously. "All right, let's go. We have to go." Everything fluttered, uncertainly, juddering in and out, sucked back in, pause. Jack grabbed his brother. "Run!" A torrent of gunfire annihilated the console, tore through the spaces where the brothers had stood, punched through all of that expensive white ceramic. The smoke wall finished its rollout, flooding across shooters and targets alike. Spot fires erupting and hissing amid the haze.
"Lost visual!"
someone shouted. "Under here," Will shouted. "Beneath the machine. Maintenance recess." "Pair off," the leader drawled. "Secure the scientists, then get the bodies to the library." Visibility was down to 5 feet. Jack kept his hand on Will's shoulder, making their way through the pall. Will was leading them down the side of the gangway, while Jack kept his eyes on the probing green lasers. "Something's wrong here, Will. Is there no beginning to your insight? These white bodies are career players. Why they're just for street theater, I have no fucking idea, but you can bet there's a reason. It's the opposite of camouflage. They want to be seen." Will stepped up on shattered glass, and 4 beams slashed toward them. Jack threw himself on top of Will as 3-rounded bursts sang past his neck hot.
"Under the ramp! They're under the ramp!"
Jack dropped down into the maintenance ring. Will scrambled. Jack followed, his booted feet disappearing over the side as a pair of questing lasers slashed through the space they had just occupied. Jack hit the grill on his left shoulder. The smoke was thinner beneath the machine, the curving recess tight with the machine's core suspended directly above them. Voices above called out their location. Jack and Will had given no one the slip. The squad leader, the one with the southern drawl, was giving orders. Irene, radio actual, have him get the bird in the air in 5. Voss, Rodriguez, get the roof off this room, the rest is secure the floor. A voice overheard barked.
Sir, 2 targets are...
Beneath that contraption, I know. Well, go on, go get 'em. Hey, fellas. Is he talking to us? Will whispered. Jack motioned him to be quiet. Listened. He heard something. Listened again. A second time. Ping. Come on out. 2 canisters rolled over the lip of the recess, clattered to the grill, trailing orange gas. Jack scooped up the first, but it was in his eyes and throat before he made contact. Tossed the first one up, blind. A hand popped over the side, holding a Glock. The shooter waved it around, blasting off shots. When it was over, Jack was curled, fetal, choking, hands pressed to his eyes, and the cloud from the second canister swept around the curve. Boys! Hands on his arm, pulling hard, Jack let himself uncurl and rise. He's reloading, Jack rasped, and he slammed Will into the wall as 13 blind rounds sprang and whined into tens of millions of dollars worth of technology. The shooter started coughing. Ah, fuck, that stuff's got a kick, don't it?
Boss, we're meant to capture Dr. Joyce alive.
I know, I was just having fun. They're fine. Go get 'em. Will's face filled Jack's vision. He was wearing the protective goggles Jack had discarded. This way! His voice was pretty hoarse, though. Butts hit metal as 2 grunts dropped into the recess. Impact reverberating, lasers on, slashing upward. One trooper headed left around the ring, the other right. Pincer. Will had popped open a decent-sized hatch. No crab crawling through the vents for them, dragging Jack behind. Is it dark in there? Jack's nose and throat were on fire. He couldn't even open his eyes, overflowing with caustic tears faster than they can wipe them away. It seems really dark in there. The techs mostly use headlamps down here. We're inside the machine. The actual machine. The entire building is given over to maintaining and running the core from the promenade, making time travel as safe as accurate as possible. Jack hacked and spat. The walls were bolted metal, occasional tangles of cables, hot technology still running. It was 50 degrees warmer in here than in the lab. I thought small was the new big. The Large Hadron Collider has a circumference of 17 miles, Will replied. A lifetime of study and sacrifice has allowed me to harness the laws of time and causality within a space no longer than the apartment building from Seinfeld. So I, and the greatest minds, have to ever lived, would appreciate you keeping your observations to yourself. Despite the dire circumstances, it was good to hear Will back in form. Jack coughed repeatedly. All he could taste was salt and snot and acid. Time travel's one thing. What's harder to believe is you know what Seinfeld is. You haven't changed at all. Can you fathom how serious these events are? Will, Jack said, gasping. Levity is a strategy adopted by many to deal with crisis. You're always like this. You're always a crisis. That's simply untrue. As if in rebuttal, green lasers snapped over Jack's shoulders. Will shoved him to the ground as 2 silhouettes snapped off a series of probing 3-round bursts. Gun cracks reverberated down the narrow throat of the corridor. I never shot at you, Will said face to face. I needed your attention. We have to get out of this tunnel. Tactical lights snapped atop the troopers' assault weapons. They were coming in. Jack reached up, yanked the pistol from the back of Will's pants, rolled and squeezed. Nothing happened.
What was that?
The troopers crouched. Jack flicked off the safety and squeezed again. His wrists took the kicks, shots going everywhere, silhouetted and vulnerable against the light from the entrance. The trooper scrambled back into the maintenance loop. Will grabbed Jack by the collar and hauled him upright. By the time the troopers hosed down the tunnel, Will and Jack had crashed around a left-hand turn. Jack pressed Will against the warm wall and dragged him down into a kneeling position. Pistol braced, he aimed at the corner as best as he could, and waited. The guards didn't pursue. I need an eye wash station, Jack croaked. Or a cafeteria. Milk, Will. Something alkaline for the eyes. He stood up, tried to bring the tunnel into focus. It was like staring into hot light. "Follow me." Will moved off, then stopped. "It happened once before," he muttered. Jack blew a noseful of something offensive onto the floor. "Will, we gotta go. Back there. You said it happened once before?" The stutter. "How could you know that? If time had stopped and restarted, it would have appeared to you as if it did to me. Seamless, unless..." The world froze, but I didn't. Then I grabbed you and... Will's eyes were scanning again, not seeing Jack. "Your proximity to the pulse altered your relationship to the chronon field. My reanimation There must have been chronon transference from you to me, meaning a non-affected person can act as a kind of causality battery of sorts. Chargeable, yes, but someone who is a causality source, even in a state in which causality has been ceased to self-generate. Will, what's... Time go bad. Get it? Causality, the flow of time, of cause and effect, is a lake. The lake contains an ecosystem. We live in that ecosystem. The lake itself is held in place by a dam. That dam is now leaking thanks to you and Paul activating that machine. Now the cracks are going to widen and then the dam breaks. No more causality, stasis, and forever now, an eternally frozen present moment. Monarch knew this was going to happen. Banked on it, I think. The machine was calibrated incorrectly. Monarch blocked my case against activation at each step. Refused my evidence. They wanted this to happen, Jack. Why? If the world goes down, it takes all of us. Monarch included. I have a contact inside the company. Horatio, a nice enough person. Boutique muffins, outrageous mustache, you know the type. Will. He tells me Monarch has been incubating something in initiative, directly related to the work at the University Time Lab. Project Lifeboat. Very few know about it. Nobody except the CEO Martin Hatch, a handful of experts inside the company, an unnamed contractor, a single lobbyist in DC, a lone recruiter in Europe. Then it clicked. Those guys in the mask are Monarch. Monarch doesn't need to steal the machine, Jack. They own it. I told you something was off about this. Jack took Will's arm. Tried to look him in the eye, but it was so dark in there he might have been staring at Will's navel for all he knew. Where's your car? It's in the parking lot, of course. And the parking lot is where? Just like old times. 300 feet from the rear of the building. Alright, let's... A pattern of high-frequency noise penetrated the tunnel from outside the building. It started as a series of 3 triple claps, and then became applause. Panic cut back into Will's voice. Is that gunfire? From outside? Jack moved past Will, feeling his way along the wall. They shooting on campus? Will's voice was rising. Who are they shooting at? It's an announcement. They want people to know this is going down. Will was breathing harder than Jack, about to hyperventilate. Jack ran his free hand over the 9mm, made sure the safety was off. 300 feet to the parking lot, right? Yes. In Jack's current condition, a flailing or unconscious Will would have been more than he could handle. A lifetime with his brother had provided a number of ways to get Will's shit under control. Hey, Will, what's the capital of Nebraska? Feeling along the walls of warm steel, a light ahead. Lincoln. Hey, Will, what's the temperature on Mercury? Okay, that was definitely a door in front of him. That's not my field. I know what you're doing. Around 500 degrees Fahrenheit as an average. Will's breathing was calming down. Hey, Will, what's a big word for someone who uses too many big words? Sesquipedantalist. He didn't even have to take a breath in the middle of that one. The corridor ended. Hey, Will, where's this door lead? That'd be the server room on the 5th floor, Will said, taking in a deep breath. We're below the time lab. The corridor beyond that has an elevator approximately 150 feet to the right. They'll take us to the ground floor. The elevator was dangerous. If anybody was watching the bays, they'd notice the elevator moving. The doors could open and they could walk out into half a dozen guns. But with Jack half blind and unable to make out anything farther than 30 feet away, would the stairs be any safer? Well, I'm going to need you to keep your eyes open. Tell me everything you see. Quietly. They stepped out of the tunnel into a cold, dark room, humming with quiet purpose. No one's here, Will whispered. It was just them, and sequential racks of fat vertical servers, midnight blue, twilight speckled with thousands of yellow and green LEDs. There was only one door, Manual, domestic looking, and open from their side. Hey, Will. Yes, Jack. When Paul went through, I caught a look at the readout. It said destination error. What does that mean? Will thought about it. Oh, dear. Can you elaborate? Because Paul did not appear prior to his own departure, he must have traveled forward. I would assume the error indicates his travel to a point that date becomes redundant. It's likely Paul set himself far enough ahead to witness the inevitable collapse of the Myers-Joyce field. The end of time? When Paul emerges from the machine, he'll be stepping into a moment that is indefinitely self-dividing. He will freeze and there'll be no coming back from that. I'm afraid he's gone, Jack. I'm sorry. Maybe I could use the machine and get him. Let's get out of here alive first. If Paul's at the end of time, he won't be going anywhere. Jack listened at the door. Couldn't hear anything, and Will risked opening it gently. The sounds of war outside, still muffled, grew louder. I don't see anything, Will said. The corridor was dark, lit by illuminated exit signs and a light coming through a wall window at the far end of the corridor. What is that? Jack said. A glass wall that overlooks the campus. Ordinarily, it's quite lovely. The applause from outside had become sporadic. But I'm not sure I want to take a look just now. Could I go forward and pull him back in like I did with you? Would that work? You're talking hypotheticals. Low frequencies from outside didn't make it through the glass outer shell and brick walls. Higher frequencies fared better. Pops. Screams. If Paul really was dead, it didn't feel real. He had to get Will to safety before it did begin to feel real again, and he fell apart. Anyone? Breathe. Anyone likely to be working late on this floor? No. Okay, let's go. Quietly. One step at a time, gun in one hand and the other on Will's shoulder. They moved toward the light at the end of the hall. Jack coughed up something watery and acrid from the 30th time, unable to contain it. Hey, he rasped. What's that? He pointed toward a dark man-sized prism against the wall of the illuminated face. Vending machine, Will said. Jack spluttered again. Does it sell? No. There was no explanation for what happened next. Will threw himself backward into Jack. Jack stumbled and then shots rang out to the end of the hall. The shooter ducked behind the corner as Jack and Will sheltered behind the machine. Jack's heart sank. The vending machine wasn't going to stop bullets. Will! Slide down! Get small when I... The shooter popped back, squeezed off 4 shots. 3 went wide, punching through corkboard, blowing out clouds of particulates. 1 hit the machine, knocked a hole in perspex, exploded 3 cans of soda, and exited 2 feet above Will's head. Jack responded by whipping out a firing blind. 3 shots. The shooter responded and Jack slammed back against the wall, air pressure pulsing with each passing slug. Jack's best guess was his pistol had maybe 4 rounds left? Maybe. Hey! He shouted. Is there some way we could do this? The shooter opened up. Jack got low and fired twice. The shooting stopped. Nothing but the ringing in his ears. Will said. Did you? Hey! Jack called out. He got to his feet. Iron sights trained on what he was pretty sure was the right place, just to the left of the open doorway to the elevator bay. Hey, man, you okay? The shooter popped out, fired. Reflexively, Jack shielded his face and fired twice before his pistol clicked out. They were both done. The shooter stood there, a silhouette a little darker than the shadow in which he stood. The shooter's gun hit the floor. Eyeshine blinked off, then on, and he toppled back against the wall. Gravity did the rest. Hey, Jack said, moving toward the man. The shooter slid down to a sitting position, despondent like someone getting bad news. Hey, brother, are you... It was dark, and was half blind, but the truth of the situation was clear. Will said, Oh, dear. Will? Jack asked. Why is he wearing black like the others? Where's his mask? Will's voice was redundant, deeply sad. Oh, Jack. I'm afraid you've crossed a most unfortunate Rubicon. The shooter was wearing a buttoned beige shirt. Jack could make that out. There was an insignia on the short sleeve. "Wait here," his brother said. Jack heard something tumble heavily to the bottom of the vending machine. A seal cracked as if it was broken, and he felt Will's hand reset on his forehead. "Water! Open your eyes!" Will gently tilted his brother's head back. Coolness was palmed onto his burning face. "Does it hurt?" Jack didn't say anything. His vision improved. Details were clearer, edges sharper. The dead man came into focus. Jack let out a breath. Quietly, "He was shooting at us, Jack." "He was just confused," Jack stated. "Hiding, probably." The badge on the man's sleeve belonged to Monarch Protective Services. Not Monarch Security. Not a soldier. Just a rent-a-cop. Just a guy with an Xbox and a crappy car and a half-eaten pizza in the fridge. I saw him outside. He knew me. From school. If Jack didn't divorce himself from Will in Riverport 6 years ago, he would have needed a job as badly as this guy, and he would have been wearing the same uniform.